The game was already over. They just didn't know it yet. While they were busy making their moves, shouting their strategies, he was playing a different game entirely. A game of absolute stillness. And in his silence, he had already orchestrated their checkmate. They saw a man sitting across the polished mahogany table, a ghost in a tailored suit, a void where a competitor should be. His name was Arthur Sterling, but in the circles of power where whispers held more weight than headlines, they called him the Watcher. Not out of respect, not yet. It was a name born of dismissal. He was the man who observed, who listened, who rarely spoke. He was the empty space in a room full of roaring egos, and they mistook his silence for weakness. They believed his stillness was emptiness. They were about to learn it was a crucible. Have you ever felt that? The sting of being underestimated, the quiet rage of being overlooked. You sit in meetings, in conversations, in your own life, a storm of ideas and ambitions raging within you, but the world outside only sees a placid surface. They talk over you, they plan around you, they assume your silence is a lack of contribution, a lack of intelligence, a lack of a threat. They have no idea that your mind is a forge, and in the heart of that silent forge you are crafting a weapon. A mind so sharp, so focused, so dangerously calm that it can cut through their noise and shatter their fragile realities. This is not a story about becoming loud. It's about harnessing the terrifying power of your own quiet. It's about understanding that in the art of war, both in the boardroom and in the battle for your own soul, the most dangerous player is not the one who makes the most noise. It is the one who has mastered the art of absolute stillness. Arthur had not always been this way. He remembered a time when he was all noise, a frantic thrashing in the churning waters of a world that demanded constant performance. He was a junior executive then, desperate to be seen, to be heard. He would speak first in every meeting, his voice tight with anxiety, offering half-formed ideas just to fill the silence he so deeply feared. He believed presence was measured in decibels. That impact was a function of interruption. He was a whirlwind of nervous energy, his leg constantly bouncing under the table, his fingers tapping out a frantic rhythm on any available surface. He thought this projected passion, a restless drive to succeed. But what it truly projected was fear. A deep, gnawing fear of being insignificant. His superiors saw it. They saw a man drowning in his own desperation, a man whose actions were not guided by strategy, but by a desperate need for validation. His ideas, even the good ones, were lost in the chaotic static of his delivery. He was a stray signal, easily ignored, quickly forgotten. His colleagues, the sharks who swam in those corporate waters, they smelled the blood of his insecurity. They would let him exhaust himself, let him talk in circles until he was breathless, and then, with a calm, predatory smile, they would dismantle his arguments with a single, well-placed sentence. He was a jester in their court, a noisy distraction while they played the real game. The breaking point came during a pivotal merger negotiation. Arthur had worked for weeks, sleeping in his office, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the burning desire to finally prove his worth. He had the data, he had the projections, he had what he believed was an unassailable strategy. He entered the boardroom that morning, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He launched into his presentation, his voice rising with every slide, a torrent of words and numbers. He felt the familiar panic rising, the desperate need to convince them through sheer force of will. And then he saw it, the look. It was on the face of the senior partner, a man named Marcus Thorne, a man who moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a glacier and was just as unstoppable. Thorne wasn't looking at the screen. He wasn't looking at the meticulously prepared documents. He was looking at Arthur, and in his eyes there was not anger, not disagreement, but something far worse. Pity. It was the look a master gives a novice who has just revealed his entire, clumsy strategy in the first move. In that moment, the noise in Arthur's head, the frantic symphony of his own anxiety, became deafening. His words faltered. His carefully constructed presentation crumbled into dust. He had lost. He had lost before he had even finished his first sentence because he had shown them his entire hand, not on the screen, but in his own frantic, uncontrolled energy. That night Arthur didn't go home. He walked the city streets, the cacophony of sirens and traffic a pale reflection of the storm inside him. He had done everything he was told to do. He had hustled, he had grinded, he had been loud, and it had all amounted to nothing but a look of pity from a man who held all the power. He ended up in an old, forgotten library, the kind with towering shelves and the sacred smell of aging paper. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just a refuge from the noise. He pulled a book from a dusty shelf, its title barely legible, Meditations. He had heard the name Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, the Stoic philosopher. He began to read, and as he read, the city outside, the failure in the boardroom, the frantic noise in his own soul began to fade. He read about the inner citadel, a fortress within the mind that no external event, no insult, no failure could ever breach. He read about the power of perception, the idea that it is not things that upset us, but our judgments about things. He read about the dichotomy of control, the wisdom of focusing only on what is within our power, our thoughts, our judgments, our actions, and letting go of everything else. He did not become a Stoic overnight. It was not a magical conversion. It was the beginning of a long, arduous process of unlearning. He had spent his entire life learning how to react, how to be loud, how to push. Now he had to learn how to be still. He started small. He would go to a park during his lunch break, not with his phone, not with a book, but just to sit on a bench. At first it was torture. His mind, accustomed to constant stimulation, screamed in protest. It dredged up every failure, every anxiety, every awkward conversation. It was a rebellion of the ego, terrified of being silenced. But Arthur persisted. He learned to simply observe the thoughts, to see them as clouds passing in the sky of his awareness, not as storms he had to fight. He learned to focus on his breath, the simple, steady rhythm of life that he had ignored for so long. He practiced this stillness in 1,000 small ways. When an annoying colleague tried to bait him into an argument, he would hold his tongue, take a breath, and respond with a calm, measured question instead of a defensive retort. When a project went wrong, instead of immediately casting blame or panicking, he would force himself to sit in silence for 5 minutes, allowing the initial wave of emotion to pass before he considered a logical, strategic response. This was the forging. Every moment of practiced stillness was another hammer blow on the steel of his mind. He was burning away the dross of his insecurity, his neediness, his reactivity. And what began to emerge was something new, something hard and sharp and incredibly powerful. People at the office started to notice the change. They didn't understand it. Arthur's frantic energy was gone, replaced by an unnerving calm. He spoke less, but when he did, his words carried an impossible weight. His questions were incisive, cutting through the fluff and exposing the heart of the issue. His silences were even more potent. In negotiations, where once he would have nervously filled every pause, he now held the silence. He would let it stretch, becoming a vacuum that the other side felt compelled to fill. And in their haste to break the uncomfortable stillness, they would reveal their weaknesses, their deadlines, their hidden fears. They were so busy fighting the silence, they didn't realize they were disarming themselves. The true test came a year later. The firm was facing another major negotiation, this time a hostile takeover attempt. The atmosphere was thick with panic. Executives were shouting in the hallways, blame was being thrown like confetti, and the frantic energy that Arthur once embodied had now consumed the entire office. And in the center of this hurricane sat Arthur, perfectly still. Marcus Thorne, the man whose look of pity had started this transformation, called him into his office. The senior partner looked exhausted, the weight of the crisis etched onto his face. He looked at Arthur, and this time there was no pity in his eyes. There was curiosity. "You're the only one in this building who doesn't look like the world is ending, Sterling," Thorne said, his voice gravelly. "What do you see that we don't?" Arthur didn't launch into a frantic presentation. He didn't offer a dozen half-baked solutions. He simply looked at Thorne and held his gaze. He had been watching. For a year, he had been the silent observer in every meeting, gathering data not just from spreadsheets, but from the subtle tells of human behavior. He saw the tremor in a rival's hand, the way a CEO's jaw tightened when a certain name was mentioned, the desperate, unspoken anxieties that drove the other side's aggression. He had mapped not their financial strategy but their psychological one. In the quiet of his own mind, free from the noise of his own ego, he had seen the entire game board with perfect clarity. He saw the one move that everyone else had missed. "They are overextended," Arthur said, his voice quiet but resonant, filling the cavernous office. "Their aggression isn't a sign of strength. It's a sign of desperation. They're bluffing, and I know how to call it. This is the first stage in forging a dangerous mind, the deconstruction of the self. You must first understand the architecture of your own weakness. Where does your frantic energy come from? Is it a fear of being invisible, a desperate craving for approval, a terror of the silence where your deepest insecurities live? You cannot build a fortress on rotten foundations. You must be willing to descend into the dungeons of your own mind, to face the anxious, needy creature that you have allowed to be in control. You must sit with it in the dark, not to fight it, but to understand it, to listen to its fears, to acknowledge its pain. This is not an act of weakness. It is an act of supreme courage. The world will tell you to build confidence through affirmations, through power poses, through faking it until you make it. This is like painting over rust. The corrosion continues to spread beneath the surface. True, unshakable confidence is not built by adding layers of pretense. It is forged by stripping away everything that is not you. It is the process of burning away the fear, the ego, the desperate need for external validation, until all that is left is your own unbreakable core. Think about the last time you felt truly panicked. A deadline looming, an unexpected confrontation, a sudden crisis. What was your first impulse? Was it to lash out, to blame someone, to run? Was it to fill the air with frantic activity, hoping that motion would be mistaken for progress? That is the old you. That is the reactive machine, the puppet pulled by the strings of external events. The path of the watcher begins with a single, revolutionary act, the decision to not react. The next time chaos erupts, I challenge you to do nothing. For just 10 seconds, while everyone else is scrambling, shouting, panicking, you will stand perfectly still. You will breathe. You will observe. You will let the initial wave of adrenaline and fear wash over you without being carried away by it. In those 10 seconds, you are no longer a victim of the circumstance. You become the eye of the storm. You are reclaiming the space between stimulus and response. And in that space, that sacred pause, lies all your power. That is where strategy is born. That is where clarity emerges. That is where the dangerous mind begins to awaken. Arthur laid out his plan for Thorne. It was simple, elegant, and ruthless. It wasn't about fighting the takeover on their terms, engaging in a costly war of attrition. It was about a single, precise strike at the psychological weak point he had identified. It required patience. It required nerve. It required absolute stillness, a willingness to let the enemy advance, to let them believe they were winning, right up until the final moment. Thorne listened, his expression unreadable. The old Arthur would have been desperate for his approval, would have started talking faster, adding unnecessary details, trying to sell the idea. The new Arthur simply stated the plan, the cold, hard logic of it, and then fell silent. He had presented the truth as he saw it. Whether Thorne accepted it was not within his control. He had mastered the art of releasing outcomes. He was focused only on the purity of the strategy itself. Thorne was silent for a full minute, the only sound the distant hum of the city. He stared at Arthur, and for the first time he saw him. Not the anxious junior executive, not the quiet observer, but a strategist. A weapon. "Do it," Thorne said finally. "The entire firm is behind you." The days that followed were a masterclass in controlled stillness. The opposing company, led by a notoriously aggressive CEO named Julian Vance, increased the pressure. They leaked damaging rumors to the press. They poached key employees. They filed frivolous legal challenges. It was a strategy of chaos, designed to induce panic and force a quick surrender. The office was in an uproar. Every new attack sent fresh waves of fear through the building. Executives burst into Arthur's office demanding that he respond, that he fight back, that he do something. And Arthur did nothing. He took the calls, he read the reports, he listened to the panicked pleas, and he remained perfectly still. He was a stone in the river, allowing the frantic current to flow around him. He knew that to react to Vance's provocations would be to play Vance's game. Vance wanted a street fight. Arthur was playing chess. His stillness was not passive. It was an active, offensive strategy. With every attack that he refused to acknowledge, Vance grew more frustrated, more desperate. Like a boxer throwing wild punches at an opponent who is no longer there, Vance began to exhaust himself. His moves became sloppier, more predictable. He was so focused on the noise he was creating that he failed to notice the silence on the other side. He mistook Arthur's stillness for fear, for paralysis. He was making the same mistake everyone had always made with Arthur, and Arthur was counting on it. He was letting Vance expose his entire strategy, his every fear, his ultimate breaking point. He was the watcher, gathering intelligence not from what Vance said, but from how he screamed into the void. What does your stillness look like? Is it a true inner calm, or is it just suppressed fear? There is a critical difference. Suppressed fear is a tense, brittle quiet. It's the silence of a man holding his breath, about to shatter. True stillness is relaxed, powerful, and expansive. It's the silence of a man who can breathe calmly at the bottom of the ocean. The first is a shield, easily broken. The second is a weapon. You cultivate this weapon by intentionally exposing yourself to discomfort. Go to a social event and make it a rule for yourself that you will not speak unless you are spoken to first. Feel the awkwardness. Feel the social pressure to fill the silence. Feel the urge to perform, to prove your worth through words, and simply sit with it. Observe it. Realize that this discomfort is not real. It is a phantom of the ego, a ghost story your mind tells you about your own inadequacy. When you can sit in a room full of people and be perfectly content in your own silence, you have developed a superpower. You have become immune to the subtle manipulations of social pressure. You are no longer a puppet dancing for the approval of others. You are the one holding the strings. Arthur was also working in the shadows. His stillness in the face of the public onslaught was a diversion. While Vance was focused on the front door, Arthur was quietly picking the lock on the back. He used the time he wasn't spending on panicked reactions to do a deep, forensic analysis of Vance's company, his investors, his personal history. He wasn't looking for financial data. He was looking for the narrative, the story that Vance told himself and the world. He discovered that Vance's entire empire was built on a single, powerful myth, the myth of the unstoppable aggressor. His investors weren't backing a company, they were backing a personality. They were addicted to the drama, the constant forward momentum, the illusion of invincibility. Arthur realized that he didn't need to defeat Vance's company. He only needed to shatter the myth of Vance himself. The endgame began with a single, anonymous email. It wasn't sent to the press. It wasn't sent to the regulators. It was sent to Vance's three largest and most conservative investors. The email contained no accusations, no threats. It was simply a meticulously compiled dossier of Vance's past negotiations, highlighting a clear pattern. a series of incredibly risky, high-leverage gambles that had, by sheer luck, paid off. But it also included a detailed projection of his current takeover attempt against Arthur's firm, showing, with cold, hard data, how this time, the gamble was predicated on a panic that wasn't materializing. The final page was a simple, stark analysis of the catastrophic downside for the investors if this one single bet failed. Arthur had used Vance's own aggression against him. He hadn't fought the myth. He had simply revealed the reckless gambling that lay beneath it. He hadn't attacked Vance's strength. He had exposed the rotten foundation upon which that strength was built. The effect was instantaneous. The investors who had been swept up in Vance's narrative of aggressive growth were suddenly forced to confront the reality of the risk they were exposed to. The myth was shattered. They called Vance, not with support but with hard questions. The confidence in their voices was gone, replaced by the cold calculus of self-preservation. The pressure was no longer on Arthur's firm. It was now squarely on Julian Vance. This is the power of the watcher's gaze. When your own mind is still, you stop seeing the world through the distorted lens of your own emotions, your own fears, your own desires. You begin to see things as they are. You see the patterns that others miss because they are too busy reacting. You see the subtle currents of human motivation that lie beneath the surface of their actions. People are talking bundles of insecurities, ambitions, and hidden narratives. They broadcast their weaknesses constantly in their tone of voice, in their choice of words, in the things they don't say. The loud, reactive person is deaf and blind to all of this. They are trapped in the prison of their own monologue. But the watcher, the still one, is a receiver. They absorb all of this data silently, patiently. They don't just hear what people say, they understand why they are saying it. They see the ghost in the machine. Do you know how to listen like this? Not just to words, but to the entire symphony of a human being. Try this. The next time you are in a conversation, particularly a difficult one, your only goal is to understand the other person's fear. What are they afraid of losing? What are they afraid of admitting? What insecurity is driving their position? Don't argue with their words. Their words are just the soldiers on the front line. You need to understand the king in the castle. When you can identify their core fear, you can speak directly to it. You no longer have to fight their army of arguments. You can walk straight into their fortress and negotiate directly with the one in charge. This is not manipulation. It is a profound form of empathy, and it is the ultimate strategic advantage. People will feel seen by you in a way they have never felt seen before, and they will give you a level of trust and influence that the loud and aggressive can only dream of. Vance was a cornered animal. The pressure from his investors was immense. His strategy of chaos had failed. He demanded a final, face-to-face meeting with Arthur and Thorne. He intended to use his famously overpowering personality to intimidate them into a favorable deal. He walked into the boardroom like a thundercloud, his two lawyers flanking him like vultures. He expected to see panic, or at least a grim tension. Instead, he saw Arthur Sterling, sitting at the far end of the table, perfectly calm, his hands resting gently on the polished wood. Thorne was there, but it was clear who was in command. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy blanket that seemed to absorb all of Vance's blustering energy. Vance began to talk, his voice booming, filling the room with accusations and threats. He paced back and forth, a caged predator trying to project dominance. The old Arthur would have crumbled. The old Arthur would have argued, defended, reacted. The new Arthur did something far more devastating. He listened. He watched. He let Vance's entire tirade wash over him, his expression one of mild, detached curiosity. He didn't interrupt. He didn't flinch. He just held his ground, a pillar of stillness in the center of Vance's manufactured storm. When Vance finally ran out of words, breathless and flushed, he glared at Arthur, waiting for the counterattack, the defense, the negotiation. Arthur let the silence hang in the air for a long, painful moment. He let Vance feel the full weight of his own exhausted fury echoing in the quiet room. Then he leaned forward slightly, and in a voice that was barely above a whisper but carried with the density of a black hole, he said a single sentence. He didn't address any of Vance's accusations. He didn't mention the takeover. He simply looked Vance in the eye and said, "It must be exhausting, maintaining the illusion for so long." It was a kill shot. The words landed with surgical precision, bypassing all of Vance's defenses and striking directly at the core fear Arthur had identified, the fear of being seen as a fraud. Vance's face went pale. The blustering, aggressive persona dissolved in an instant, revealing the terrified, over-leveraged gambler beneath. He had spent his entire life building the myth of the unstoppable man, and in one quiet sentence, Arthur Sterling had shown him that he saw right through it. The game was over. Vance knew it. Arthur knew it. And now, Vance knew that Arthur knew. There was no negotiation. There were only terms of surrender. Vance and his lawyers left the room not with a deal but with the wreckage of their own failed strategy. This is the endgame of Stillness. It is not about permanent passivity. It is about conserving all of your energy, all of your focus, all of your power for the one decisive moment. The world of noise is a world of wasted motion. People exhaust themselves fighting unwinnable battles, arguing with fools, reacting to every minor provocation. They bleed their power away in 1,000 tiny cuts. The watcher understands that most battles are won by not fighting at all. They refuse to be drawn into the chaos. They remain still, they observe, they conserve their strength. And when the perfect moment arrives, a moment that only they can see because their vision is not clouded by the fog of reaction, they act. And that action, born from a place of absolute stillness and clarity, is unstoppable. It is not a wild, frantic swing. It is a single, perfect strike. What is the one most important battle you are facing in your life right now? Is it a career goal, a relationship struggle, an internal war with your own demons? Now ask yourself, how much of your energy are you wasting on the periphery of that battle? How much time do you spend complaining, worrying, arguing about things that are not the central issue? The stillness you are cultivating is not just for boardroom negotiations. It is for your life. It is the practice of withdrawing your energy from the 1,000 distractions and focusing it like a laser on the one thing that truly matters. It is about learning to distinguish between the signal and the noise. When you can do this, when you can apply your full, undivided power to the one critical point, you become a force of nature. You will achieve in a single, decisive action what others fail to achieve in a lifetime of frantic effort. In the aftermath, Arthur Sterling was no longer just the watcher. He became a legend within the firm and soon beyond it. Not because he had become loud or aggressive, but because he had demonstrated a new kind of power. A power that didn't need to announce itself. A power that was felt in its absence, in its quiet confidence, in its unnerving stillness. Thorne made him a senior partner, but Arthur's ambition was no longer about titles or validation. He had found something far more valuable in the silent depths of his own mind. He had found his inner citadel. He had faced his own weakness and transformed it into a devastating strength. He had learned that the man who controls his own mind, who can sit calmly in the heart of the storm, is the man who controls the world around him. He didn't need the world to see him anymore. He was content to simply watch. Because he knew that in a world of noise, the silent observer holds all the cards. He knew that the game is always played on two levels: the loud, chaotic one that everyone sees, and the quiet, strategic one that only the still ones can perceive. And the one who masters the silent game will always win the endgame. Your journey begins now. It does not begin in a library or on a meditation cushion. It begins in the next moment of chaos that life throws at you, the next time someone cuts you off in traffic, the next time you receive a critical email, the next time you feel the hot flush of anger or the cold grip of fear. In that moment, you have a choice. You can react as you have always done and remain a puppet of your circumstances, or you can choose to be still, to breathe, to watch, to access the quiet, powerful space that exists within you. This is not easy. Your mind will fight you. Your ego will scream. The world will tempt you with the sweet, addictive poison of outrage and reaction. But you must resist. Every time you choose stillness over reactivity, you are casting a vote for a new version of yourself. You are laying another stone in the foundation of your inner citadel. Do not mistake this for a path of passivity. This is the warrior's path. It takes more strength, more discipline, more courage to remain still in the face of provocation than it does to lash out. It is the training of a mental samurai, learning to draw the sword of your action only when the moment is perfect, and with an intention so clear and focused that it cannot fail. This is how you forge a dangerous mind. Not dangerous to others in a malicious way, but dangerous to the obstacles that stand in your way. Dangerous to the limitations you have placed on yourself. Dangerous to the loud, chaotic world that seeks to keep you small and reactive. Look around you. The world is addicted to noise. It is a sea of frantic, desperate energy. People are shouting to be heard, but no one is listening. They are moving constantly, but they are going nowhere. In this world, the person who can cultivate absolute stillness is king. You will become a mystery. People will not understand you. Your calm will unnerve them. Your silence will command their attention more than their loudest shouts ever could. They will see you as an anomaly, a force to be reckoned with. They will not know the source of your power, but they will feel its gravity. This is the watcher's endgame. It is the realization that the ultimate power is not the power to control others, but the power to control yourself. When you are no longer a slave to your own impulses, your own fears, your own ego, you become truly free. You move through the world not as a leaf blown by the wind, but as the wind itself. You are no longer playing their game. You are playing your own, and in your game the rules are different. The most powerful move is stillness. The greatest weapon is a quiet mind. And the victory is not a loud, bombastic celebration, but a deep, unshakable, and silent peace. The peace of knowing that no matter what storm rages outside, the center of your being is, and will always be, perfectly, dangerously still. So I ask you, are you ready to stop being a part of the noise? Are you ready to start listening to the silence? The journey is not for the faint of heart. It will demand everything from you. But the reward is a power that few will ever know. The power of a mind forged in stillness. The question is not whether you can do it. The question is whether you will. Let us know in the comments below the first step you will take today to cultivate stillness in your life. Don't just watch this and move on. Start the work. Join the community of those who are tired of the noise, of those who are ready to discover the dangerous power that lies dormant within them. Your endgame awaits.